It's time for some Trailblazing Justice, the weekly podcast where we discuss civil rights surrounding the criminal legal system in Oregon and beyond. Trailblazing Justice is a production of the Oregon Justice Resource Center.
Welcome to Trailblazing Justice. My name is Bhavin Singh. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Justice Resource Center, and I'm with Zach Winston, our Director of Policy and Outreach, and we're back after about a year or so, maybe more. Has it been longer, Zach? I feel like it's been longer.
Feels like it's been forever.
I know you've been pushing to do the podcast for a while, but we're back after a long hiatus, and our hope is really to get the podcast up and running again on a weekly basis, maybe even more than that on some instances, but to really be talking about the things that are going on, not only with our organizational work, but things that are going on in this country and in Oregon in response to Trump. And use this as a vehicle for public education to talk about the issues that people may be concerned about and how it all relates to the work that we're doing around the criminal system. So we're excited to be back. Today, we have like a fun conversation around the legislative session. It'll be an update of what the OJRC has been doing in the 2025 legislative session. We figure this will be a good, easy way back into podcasting. And we have our additional co-host, Julia Yoshimoto, who's the director of the Women's Justice Project and senior advisor. And joining us today, too, is Kyle Hedquist and Kyle Black, our policy associates. But we'll allow them to do introductions in just a second. Zach or Julia, anything else you want to talk about why we're doing the podcast?
No, just felt we needed to start it back up again, and especially with all the developments since our last podcast that was released. So there's been a lot that's happened, and so glad to be back and hopefully on a regular schedule here.
Yeah, we have a lot of content I think in the works for recording over the next few weeks. So hopefully, at least in this first couple of months, we'll have some regular shows coming out each week, and we're hoping to record sometime throughout the week and then have them released regularly on Friday, but we may have some supplemental or special episodes that come out, outside of that Friday schedule. But why don't we do some quick introductions just so folks know so our listeners know who is with us today. I know I just did a brief introduction, but this way people can get familiar with your voices. But Zach, you want to start and just introduce yourself?
Yes, just so everyone can get familiar with my voice. I'm Zach Winston. I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach with OJRC, and been here probably came in 2020, so we're going on to finished year 3, going on to year 4. Just a quick background, I'm formerly incarcerated, then went to law school, practiced criminal defense law for a little bit, and came over to OJRC, and have been working with the policy team and love working with our policy team. It's everyone who is on the team are formerly incarcerated. So it gives us, I think, a really unique perspective and ability to speak to legislators and other advocates about what's really going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is, I think, a unique aspect about our policy team. And we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. But I also want to emphasize that our policy team is made up of the team it is because of the kind of work, the substantive work, the quality work that they do, and also that they bring their lived experiences to the job as well. So it's a nice, I think, aspect of our policy team that we can really bring a perspective that I think has really been missing from the legislative conversation or even the interactions with legislature. But Julia, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Julia Yoshimoto. I'm the Women's Justice Project Director and Senior Advisor at the Oregon Justice Resource Center. I've been providing legal services to women incarcerated at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, which is Oregon's women's prison, since 2014, and the director of the Women's Justice Project now for close to 10 years. We started in July of 2015, and been supporting women as they try to get ready for release and try to ease that transition out for them from prison back into the community by helping them with a variety of legal issues and barriers that they're facing, whether it's family law issues or debt or driver's licenses, just a whole host of things that people are trying to take care of while they're incarcerated so that they're eased back into the community. they can ease back into the community and reintegrate with their families and reestablish themselves. And in doing that work, I hear a lot from women about their experiences in the criminal justice system, which tends to have its own sort of characteristics or unique qualities to it, as compared to men going through the criminal justice system. So the Women's Justice Project also does a lot of public education and policy work regarding women in the criminal justice system, from arrest through to reentry.
Yeah, but that's only part of what you do. Yeah, Julia is also a senior advisor, and she works with me on helping to develop broader strategies around impact work and policy work. So Julia has been leading up a lot of, helping to lead up a lot of the policy work with Zach this past session. What's funny is all the bills that she's working on actually mostly made it through, and all the bills that all of us that she wasn't working on didn't make it through. We'll have an update on all of that later.
I think there's a lot more that went into the way things worked out than just whether I was there.
Kyle Black, do you want to give an introduction of yourself real quick?
Hi there. My name's Kyle Colleen Black, and I work at the Oregon Justice Resource Center as their policy and outreach person. And I was incarcerated for 28 years, and now I go to the Capitol and talk about what it was like to be incarcerated and how that system needs to change. And one of the things that is very encouraging to me is that the Oregon Justice Resource Center allows me to feel successful coming out of prison and being able to talk about what that experience was like, and it gives me the opportunity to go and try to talk to other people who don't know what that experience is like, but are making decisions about how people are housed and what they go through while they're there. And so I'm excited to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great having Kyle Black as our one of our faces in the Capitol, and we'll talk a little bit later in the podcast about their experiences and impressions, and the kind of conversations they've been having. But coincidentally, our other policy associate is also named Kyle, so we refer to them as the Kyles. I don't know if they like it or not, but it's easy for us to be able to, to be able to say, the Kyles, can you do this or that, or can you help us with this? But our other policy associate is Kyle Hedquist. Do you want to do a quick introduction, Kyle?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Kyle Hedquist, and I am another policy associate. I work with Kyle Black. Both of us together are known as the Kyles, both at OJRC and the state capitol. And it is just a great opportunity for both of us to give our perspectives. I was also incarcerated for 28 years, received clemency from Governor Brown. And about 3 months after my release in 2022, I started working for OJRC on policy for the legislative session in 2023. So this makes number 2 for me. And I'm excited to bring the perspective of those who were incarcerated and those of us who are advocating for those left behind. So this is good work, and it's a great team that we have here.
It is a great team.
And a quick shout out to Kyle Hedquist, who just picked up his diploma, his bachelor's degree. So, which I believe started inside, and he's continued it on the outside. And just congratulations. So.
What's interesting, and I was going to share this with you when you were sharing the message. Congratulations. What a huge accomplishment. But I took about as long as you did to finish your undergrad degree without having to confront even like a fraction of the challenges or barriers that you had to do. So, it's all to say, things can turn out all right, even if it takes a little bit of time to complete your undergrad.
Yep. Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations. So I think the first thing that we want to do, because part of the podcast is to help inform or educate, listeners out there. A lot of people are not familiar with the legislative process here in Oregon. It tends to be somewhat confusing and not easily understood, just because there's only a small percentage or a small number of people who are actually involved with the legislative process. And then Oregon also has a unique system in which we don't have a full-time legislative body. So that in itself sort of instructs or guides how often it meets and, when things can be passed. But Zach, do you want to just give like a high-level overview of the Oregon legislature, when it meets, what kind of session we're in, and, what are the purposes of the different kind of sessions that we have?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Bob, and the lack of a full-time legislature is interesting, and creates kind of some unique circumstances in Oregon that we encounter. So Oregon alternates between a long session and a short session. So the short session years are 1 month roughly.
They're the even years.
They're the even years. Yep. And they are about a month. Legislators only have 2 bills that they can introduce. And it generally is extremely intense for a relatively short period of time. So bills really do need to be ready to go, fully baked, and the support kind of solidified to get any chance of moving. That said, it follows relatively the same process that I'll describe that the long session does in terms of like how bills actually maneuver. It's just on a much quicker timeline. The long sessions, which is what we're in now, are about 6 months, January to the end of June. And so bills can be worked a lot more than in the short session. And so that is really interesting to get when Kyle Hedquist is talking about, this is second session. It's really, there is a big difference between the short session and long session. So it's really good to get an idea of both of them. And so generally speaking, the short session is reserved. What you'll generally hear is that the short session is reserved for bills that are like cleaning up long session bills where there was maybe an unintended consequence or something wrong in the statute that was passed, or funding related bills. That there is a aversion to moving anything that is kind of a big policy change. Now, I think in reality, that doesn't actually hold true. That's just what's said. I don't know that I subscribe to that. And especially in recent years, we've seen huge policy bills that have moved through a short session. What does make a practical difference is the requirement that legislators can only introduce 2 bills, and that does whittle it down a lot, and so it's a lot easier to focus on the bills. I think this session, it's something over 3,000 bills have been filed in this long session, and so that makes it a lot more difficult. But that's kind of a basic structure overview of the difference between the long session and short sessions.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, I think the historical origins of a part-time legislature has to do with the idea that the state is smaller. It was an agriculture state. So the idea that people were working and, to give deference to, people's schedules and things like that. So the long session, I think, as you mentioned, and the number of bills is really a session focused on pushing substantive policies. The short session, it used to be really historically reserved for financial or budgetary fixes or quick fixes, which is why when you said that the bill has to be baked, what you mean by that is like the bill just has to be like very clean. There can't be any really conflict or controversy around it. Everyone has to be in agreement about like what it is it's trying to accomplish, and once it's passed, like it's not going to result in some perhaps like transformative thing. So the short sessions are really meant to be for cleanups and things that can go through kind of quickly because there's just not that much time for discussion. And maybe towards the end, if we have time, we can talk about the pros and cons of a part-time legislative body. But it does create a different type of environment, but it also makes the odd sessions, the odd years, the long sessions, really full. I mean, like you said, thousands of bills that are being pushed into the long session because it's the opportunity to get it through. Any other kind of things that you noticed, or Julia, or any of the Kyles? I mean, just something about this long session, short session kind of structure that you think would be useful for people to hear?
I think there is this push, this rush. Like Zach mentioned, it's literally thousands of bills that they're trying to push through in a 6-month. every other year cycle. And so the Capitol is full of activity, full of interest groups, full of advocates from every corner of Oregon. And as one might expect, a lot of stuff gets left behind. We simply run out of time.
Yeah, Kyle Black.
I noticed too that, and this is kind of on the surface level, but people are in a much better mood in the shorter session. In the longer session, everybody just seems so much more pressured. They have their own agendas. They are on task. They are, meeting deadlines, and they are so much busier, and they are much more receptive in the shorter session than in the longer session.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to imagine that has a lot to do with just the volume of work that has to be done and the diversity of work that's being, thought about on any given day, which is, quite extraordinary, like from transportation to health to criminal systems to, wildfire management, all this kind of stuff gets thrown in the mix. But, I don't know what the legislative body, sort of the operational sides are in every state. And I don't know how many states have part-time legislative bodies, but it's definitely an oddity, I think, that exists here in Oregon, one that I feel is a bit outdated. But, we'll talk a little bit more about, again, the pros and cons a little bit down the road. But so we have this long session, short session. Now that we have that kind of out of the way, we have, 60 representatives. We have two chambers, the House and Senate. We have, I think, 60 representatives and 40 senators. Is that right? Did I get that right? 30 senators and 60 representatives.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
All right. All right. It's always important to know this. So, and right now in each of the chambers, so in the Senate, the Democrats have near supermajority, and on the House side, the Democrats have near supermajority. And so that also influences how these sessions can move and what are the priorities for the session. So generally speaking, like the senators are elected, I think every 6 years or 4 years, every 6 years. And the representatives are voted in every 2 years.
Oregon senators serve 4-year terms.
4-year terms. Okay. That's what I thought. All right.
They're staggered 4, which is why it sometimes feels like.
All right. So 4 years for the Senate. That's what I thought, and 2 years for the reps. But the nice thing about the senators is because they're serving longer terms, and most public officials or elected representatives or senators serve more than one term, that you get these senators that can actually get familiar with your organization, your work, and the issues that you work on. So you have like just that longer time, like that shelf life of the legislator to be able to work with. On the House side, it turns over every 2 years. There's, I think, pretty significant turnover. It feels like turnover in the House because people move on, whatever it may be, contested races. But that is the challenge, I think, with the House side. But with the House side, you have more representatives to work with, more people that could be, sympathetic to the issues that, that we're working on or others are working on. I don't know. Any thoughts on just generally the Senate or the House, or any additional comments people want to add?
I would just say generally the senators are more experienced, generally speaking. The Senate is, because they have fewer members, they generally have fewer bills. And so you can sometimes get some more discussion, some more time to discuss bills. It's still really tight, but it sometimes gets you a little bit more deliberation on the Senate side than the House side. The House side is, Bob, and to your point, it's great because it has so many individuals. At the same time, it's really hard when you're trying to do a vote count or trying to get, information to all the representatives. It's a lot of individuals to try and track down and to try to disseminate information to. So that's the uniqueness of kind of the two different chambers.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me, like interacting with senators or representatives, and just sometimes the vibe or the difference that you get. I think it does feel like the senators, I don't know, feel, because there's less of them, it feels like I don't know, that there's a little bit more gravitas to them than the reps. I don't know if that's just me, but it just feels a little different interacting with the Senate side. And also, we tend to start our stuff on the Senate side for particular reasons because we have better relationships with some of the senators than we do on the House side. Kyle Black.
Hi, I was going to say that I noticed that the reps are just a little easier to talk to. They're a little
Uh,
more common folk or welcoming, so to speak. And I think that they're a little more relevant on some of the issues in their districts or some of the things that are, kind of on the ground floor, where sometimes the senators seem a little more lofty and thinking about bigger issues, more to speak, but not necessarily issues that aren't as impacting for people in their communities.
that kind of makes sense. I mean, you have more reps and they're more connected like to their communities in some ways than the senators. That's interesting, like that you have that experience in my experience, maybe because I'm more interested in the big stuff that I
Yeah.
have a different, more positive interactions with the senators than you do, who are trying to get to know the reps and understand like the stuff more at the community level.
Yes.
All right. Well, so we have the Senate and we have the House, two chambers. So now the big question is what happens when we're trying to move a bill? It gets introduced, or how does it happen, Zach? How do we get a bill from start to finish? And can you describe it in 2 minutes?
No, but I can try. It sounds like you're asking how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
So you have a concept that you want to get passed. You bring it to you identify legislators that might be interested in introducing the bill for you, and see if they're willing to do so. And if they are willing to do so, then you can submit what's called an LC request. And so that request goes to Legislative Council, who then do a couple drafts for you. You get the drafts back. You work with a legislator. You work with other advocates potentially on the draft to make sure it's what you want. And once it's in a state in which you're happy with, you then pre-session file the bill. And so that would be generally the September before the session starts. You pre-session file it, and then you do a lot of the groundwork to try and get the bill supported. So you go to legislators, tell them what the concept is, usually like a one page or some informational documents for them, see if they'd be willing to sign on to the bill. So you're drumming up that support, talking to various different legislators. And then when the session starts, the bill gets introduced, and it gets introduced into a committee, a policy committee. So almost all of our bills, except for one, for example, this session, go into the judiciary committees, either in the House or the Senate, depending on what side you're starting it on. And so the goal then really becomes getting support to get the bill voted out of that committee. And so that happens through you get a public hearing, and then what you're really searching for is a work session. And that work session is where legislators would vote the bill out of their committee, of the policy committee. And so most of our bills go to what's called Joint Ways and Means, which is kind of the budget committee. And once they're debated again, you're trying to get the bill out of that to the floor. So for example, if the bill starts on the Senate side, you move it out of Senate Judiciary into Joint Ways and Means, and then you want to move it out of Ways and Means onto the Senate floor and then over to the House floor. And there's another avenue, which is if you don't go to Ways and Means, so if the bill doesn't have a fiscal impact, the bill is sent straight to the House floor or to the Senate floor, for example, and then it goes over to the House Judiciary Committee and then up to the House floor. So those are the two different paths.
All right, so that's a lot. So we sprinted a bill through, and I wish it was as quick and as painless as sort of Zach explained it. But yeah, the bill. I mean, I think one of the important points is that really for the majority of bills to be successful, it requires like a lot of work ahead of time, which is prior to the legislative session, the summer before, you're developing concepts or ideas. You're meeting with legislators to try to get a sponsor or supporter for the concept. Then you're trying to drop it like in September, October, November so it can get drafted. and ready for pre-session filing in December. Now, that's not always the case. You can develop concepts after January, after the session starts, and try to move things, more quickly in an expedited way, but it tends to be more complicated. So that way, when you do work the bill, you've already developed some support for it, either through coalition or with legislators, or just generally, you're getting people to buy into the concept or having the concept ready to get people to, get support around it. Um, so as you mentioned, once the bill's introduced, officially, there's a reading that starts at the beginning of session where all the bills are read and they get filtered to basically expertise or specialty committees. There's all these different committees with legislators that are supposed to be focused on certain issues. So there's like a transportation committee, a healthcare committee, other types of committees. Ours, like Zach said, goes to the Judiciary Committee, either on the House or Senate side. And that's where the policy is debated. Some of the stuff does require additional funding for it to be implemented, as Zach mentioned, which is called a fiscal. And if that bill, so for example, if we're asking for a new program to be started at DOC or for the Department of Corrections to do something, it usually requires them needing additional resources. So they'll put called a fiscal on it. And that means it goes down to the fiscal committee, where the Ways and Means Committee, as a joint committee, determine whether or not it's appropriate to allocate funds for it. As Zach mentioned, if there's not a fiscal, then it just goes from one chamber to the other, kind of mirror images of each other. Floor on one side, then it crosses over to the other side to the specialty committee, and then, gets debated and goes back up to the floor. And if there's changes that happen or amendments, there's a reconciliation process. But that's sort of like the general flow of a bill. And then it gets to the governor's desk. But I think one of the most important things that we just sort of hit is that there's a deadline that comes around midway. Do you want to talk about that, Zach, and why that's important?
Yeah, so there's a couple deadlines that are important. The first is to get a work session posted, and so that's a rush to get the committees to just have to schedule.
And what is a work session? Like, there's two things: a public hearing and a work session that every committee holds for a bill. So a public hearing, yeah, if a bill is successful. So first they hold a public hearing on a bill, and that is.
Yeah, so a public hearing is where the public is allowed to come and testify, theoretically, on a bill. You can also put written testimony in, or you can put live testimony in. These days, you can do it remote or in person, and the legislators listen to the testimony, and you can sometimes receive questions from them. Sometimes they don't ask any questions. Oftentimes, testimony time is limited, and that goes to just the number of bills that are introduced and the limited time that the committee has to actually hear all the different bills that they want to hear. So, you often have to pack a lot into very little time and rely on the written testimony for the rest. And so that's essentially what the public hearing is. Yeah,
so they open up a public hearing, like you said, that is for the public, and that's an opportunity for people to provide testimony. And maybe in a follow-up episode, we can talk about what it goes into planning a public hearing and what that looks like and how important those are in the context of passing a bill. But I'll just say, for the purposes of this recording, it's mixed, right? Like, sometimes the public hearing is mainly symbolic. Sometimes it's persuasive and can help move people. It just depends on the bill and sort of the moment. But then there's this thing called work session, which gets scheduled afterwards. And what is a work session?
A work session is mainly, there's a couple things that go on in a work session. So if the bill has amendments, that's when the committee can discuss and then potentially adopt amendments to the bill. Then after that discussion, it goes to discussions on the bill itself. So whether it's as amended or as it was originally introduced, legislators have a conversation sometimes. Sometimes they don't. And they discuss whether, their opinions on the bill, whether they have any questions on the bill. And then the bill gets generally, if they're going to move forward with the work session, then there's a roll call vote that the chair calls, and the bill is either voted out of the committee or it's, not successful, and then it stays within the committee.
Yeah, and a work session is, it's interesting. Like, the public hearing is a public hearing. The work session is truly a work session for the legislators. Like this is not open to the public. It's like you said, a conversation among the legislators, typically to debate the bill. They may invite some members of the public to participate or proponents or advocates of the bill to come and clarify, but it's not typically like where it's a very open process at that point. That's the point where they're making a decision of whether or not to vote the bill out of committee.
Right. You can't sign up to testify, for example, in a work session versus what you can do in a public hearing. That said, it is live streamed and you can watch the work session. So it's not open to the public to participate. It's open to the public to watch. And sometimes they allow experts or the advocates to appear to answer any questions that may come up during the work session.
All right. And I know you were mentioning like the deadline for the work session, but just to keep things a little high level, let's just talk about the crossover deadline. Like,
yeah.
What happens at sort of midway at the legislative session?
Yeah, so after the work session deadline, then there's the first chamber deadline, and so that's when a bill has to be, barring some exceptions as there always are, the bill has to be voted out of the committee. So out of Senate Judiciary, for example, in the case of a lot of our bills. And if you don't make it out there are ways in which you could potentially, I guess, save your bill, but essentially
very low probability at that point.
Very low probability. And so, yeah, so that was just on April 9th.
And what that does is like that first chamber deadline, what I'd say like scheduling of the public hearing gives like an initial priority of what bills the legislature is interested in, like the Senate, let's say, like Senate Judiciary. It gives us an idea of, okay, these are the bills that have the potential to move. And it's only a fraction of the bills that are introduced. Then that further gets winnowed down by the ones that actually get work sessions, because those are the ones that are actually potentially going to get a vote out of committee. The ones that get voted out of committee before the chamber deadlines, those are the bills that we say are still alive, which at this point, from the thousands of bills that have been initially introduced, we're down now to like a much, much, much smaller number. So that it really is like the first sort of screening process of like what is actually potentially going to make it through from a policy standpoint. So very important deadline, right?
Yes.
And we actually had a number of bills that made it through the first chamber deadline. Let's talk about those. All right. So that's just like a quick overview of the legislative session. We'll come back in a subsequent podcast to talk about more details or nuances of the legislative session. I know we've had like a previous podcast on the legislative session, so you could go back and look at our archives to look at that as well. But I do want to get into the bills that OJRC has been helping. We've either been a resource to legislators, providing them education about these issues and drafting these concepts, or we've helped draft these concepts about and helped educate legislators about the importance of why these concepts are important to move. So let's start with the first bill that we got out, Remembering. Julia, do you want to give us a little quick overview of what the Remembering bill is?
The Remembering bill is a bill that asks for funding through the legislature for our legal services program. And this is a concept that came out of work that I was doing when the Women's Justice Project first started back in 2015. And just seeing the tremendous need in Coffee Creek for assistance with family law matters, debt issues, driver's licenses, property issues, just a whole host of things that people were trying to take care of before they released from prison. And it was nearly impossible and it still continues to be without our services, impossible for people in custody to be able to get the information that they need to address the issues that they're facing while they're incarcerated. And these sort of non-criminal legal issues that they're facing just kind of get exacerbated and compounded into bigger issues during their incarceration, and when they get released, there's really no legal services or attorneys available to help them with this. And so I was providing these services initially through an organization called Red Lodge Transition Services that works with Native American women in Coffee Creek and assists them on their transition out of prison. And back in 2018, we did an informational hearing before House Judiciary on these services just to explain how important they are and how beneficial people were finding them. And at that time, co-chair of House Judiciary, Representative Tana Sanchez, approached us after and suggested that we submit a bill to get funded as a pilot project for these legal services. And in 2019, we were able to get our initial funding, and the name of the program was Remembering, with the concept of we are trying to remember people back into our community, and recognizing that people who are incarcerated are part of our Oregon communities, and they will be returning to our local communities after prison. And so this bill is a refunding of these legal services that have been incredibly successful. We've had reviews of the program through the Criminal Justice Commission, and you can take a look at some of their reports, but we provide services to about 60 to 70 women now in Coffee Creek, and are providing them with assistance of like anywhere from 1 to 9 different non-criminal legal matters that they're trying to address.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important is that this is funding that we're getting again. We're asking for an increase of funding just to help support more staff. But it was interesting just recalling that history that I forgot. I remember that you did the informational hearing, and then Rep. Sanchez came up afterwards and like, let's just go for funding. And so we did it that year. So yeah, that bill moved out of House. Was it House Judiciary? No, Senate Judiciary. House Judiciary?
House Judiciary.
Yeah. With bipartisan support. So it was a nice bill to get out and sitting in Ways and Means. Let's see. The next bill that we have we're working on is the medical bill. Julia, do you want to, like I said, some of these bills Julia has been working on. So I'll have Julia talk about the medical bill real quick.
The concept behind this bill came largely from input by Angela Kim, who is on staff with the Oregon Justice Resource Center. She was formerly incarcerated at Coffee Creek, and she's a retired nurse. And she saw a lot of horrifying things going on in Coffee Creek when it came to medical care. And she identified some very basic concepts that Department of Corrections should be required to do. For example, they should be required to care for people with pre-existing conditions. And so that's in this bill, a requirement for DOC to do that. She alerted us to the fact that Department of Corrections is considering the length of time that somebody has left on their prison term when they're deciding whether or not to provide medical care for that individual, with what she calls slow playing, that if there's not much time left on their sentence, they are just going to wait it out and ask the AIC or the adult in custody to wait it out and get medical care out in the community. She alerted us to the fact that the medication formulary is incredibly outdated and creating a lot of problems for people because they're not getting the proper medication to address their medical issue. And so what this bill does is it brings the medication formulary for the Department of Corrections up to date to 2025. And this bill made it through the Senate Healthcare Committee and is sitting in Ways and Means. And the co-chair or the chair for Senate, the Senate Healthcare Committee, Senator Patterson, had some very interesting comments about this bill, recognizing that these are very basic things that should be available to anyone receiving medical care. And she was a little, I think, taken aback by the fact that they had to put this in statute. But this is where we are at with the Department of Corrections. The legislature really does need to step in and provide some basic guidance to the way people in custody should be treated.
Yeah, I think this will be a hugely impactful bill if it passes. Zach, you want to give us just a quick update on compensation and voting rights?
Yeah, so compensation's one that we've been working with community partners on, and the National Innocence Project as well has been supporting it. So in previous sessions had passed compensation for exonerees bill. that has been in effect, and some individuals have been able to use it. But there were a couple things that needed to be fixed with it. So some pretty small tweaks needed to be made. And so that is a bill that covers those relatively small changes. And so that's a bill that we support, and it has made its way over to Ways and Means. And then voting rights is our bill to allow people who are incarcerated in Oregon's prisons to vote while incarcerated. And it's a bill that we've been running since I first started, so back in 2020. No state has actually re-enfranchised this population yet. DC, Washington, DC, and Puerto Rico have. Maine and Vermont never disenfranchised this population. But no state has been able to actually accomplish this, and that's one of the reasons it's such an uphill battle. So what Rep. Chaichi has introduced it in the House side. It was sent over to House Rules, which we can say for another podcast of House Rules and why bills go to House Rules and what ends up happening to them. It's an uphill battle as well to get bills out of House Rules usually, or out of the Rules Committee. So the bill's over there, but I do think we're going to be able to generate some good public education and some legislator education around the bill and around the concept through communications and hopefully an informational hearing. And so that's the hope out of that. And I know a lot of formers, including myself, really love this bill and really want to see it pass. And I think that we just need to keep introducing it, keep it front of mind, keep pushing. And, one day a state's going to do it. And I hope Oregon's the first.
And the last bill, do you want to just talk about the GIPA bill, omnibus bill, Julia, real quick? I know it's a big one. Maybe we can come back. We'll have a follow-up conversation about it because there's some activity around it right now that we're generating that we can do like a debrief on. But do you just want to give a general idea of what the GIPA bill was about?
So GIPA stands for Gender Informed Practices Assessment. And back in 2023, the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, Oregon's women's prison, underwent a GIPA assessment by out-of-state experts to look at the prison's practices and policies from admission into the prison to release, and how gender responsive they are, trauma informed, and evidence-based those practices and policies are. In 2023, the GIPA report came out in August of 2023, and the GIPA report, I would say, was a pretty damning report as to the conditions and the systems and the structures at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. And it basically found that none of Coffee Creek's policies, practices, and even the physical structure of the institution itself is really gender responsive, evidence-based, or trauma informed. And the report talked about gross failures and dysfunction in sort of all aspects of prison operations and protocols and services. And in the GIPA report, these out-of-state experts provided recommendations for Oregon to sort of align itself with more gender responsive and trauma-informed systems and practices. In response to this GIPA report, the Governor Kotek, found this to be a very sobering read and pulled together what she called an advisory panel, a GIPA advisory panel made up of formerly incarcerated individuals, formerly incarcerated at Coffee Creek, nonprofit organization advocates who are very familiar with the population at Coffee Creek, program providers at Coffee Creek, and also some DOC staff to be part of this advisory panel that was meant to come up with recommendations in response to the GIPA report. So the advisory panel, I want to say about 6 people from our staff participated in either the advisory panel or the work groups that came out of the advisory panel. And in total, the advisory panel and the work group members came up with over 300 recommendations as to what the Department of Corrections should do in response to the problems that the GIPA report highlighted. Instead of requiring that the Department of Corrections implement some of these recommendations through statutory mandates, the governor and decided that these recommendations would just go to the Department of Corrections and they would decide what they wanted to implement and how they wanted to implement it and what timeline they wanted to do all of this work in. We at the Oregon Justice Resource Center from the beginning of this have been saying that we cannot leave it up to the Department of Corrections to fix this problem, this enormous problem that they've created at Coffee Creek, that we need to have some statutory mandates of things that they are required to do. Despite all of our efforts to get this to the governor and to have her act upon this and introduce legislation in 2025, the governor's office was not willing to put forward their own legislation. So we took the recommendations that came out of the GIPA report and out of the work groups that were formed on different issue areas and took those recommendations and put it into an omnibus bill with statutory requirements and mandates for the Department of Corrections. And that bill was Senate Bill 1120.
Yeah, it's a big bill. Zach and Julia drafted it prior to the legislative session. I mean, I think our hopes were to get an informational hearing to be able to discuss this with legislators, but the senators decided to have a public hearing on it and voted it out of committee from a policy perspective, saying that this was important. It does have a lot in the bill. And I think to Julia's point, this was just about showing the legislature that they can actually create clear guidelines to DOC about how it is that they should treat AICs. So it got out of committee. It's down in Ways and Means. We're recording this podcast on a Tuesday, but on Wednesday, April 16th, there's going to be a rally in Salem around the GIPA informational hearing. But those are the bills that we have going. And, Kyle's about to take off, but something we could get Kyle in before the hour was up. But it took a lot to get through all of that. But I mean, those were all the bills that we had going this session that made it through. There were a number of bills that didn't make it through. We can have like a follow-up conversation based on that. But just real quick at the end, I mean, I don't know, Kyle Black, if you have a few moments, what have your thoughts and impressions been of this legislative session?
One of the things that I've noticed is it is really nice to be representing the incarcerated at the Capitol when the DAs and when the prosecutors and when people are coming up and they're testifying about the character of those that are incarcerated, and people are seeing Kyle and I in the audience, and they're talking with us every day, and they're taking meetings with us, and so they're getting to see the other side of what an incarcerated person is. And I do think that it is changing people's perspectives, and I also think that being down there and talking constantly, it isn't out of sight, out of mind anymore, because it's pretty easy to forget that you have almost 13,000 people incarcerated when two of them are constantly in the audience and you're making decisions about how you house them and about how, what type of conditions that the institutions have for them. And so I see that happening, that there is just a bit of more thoughtfulness happening with the senators and the representatives, because there's someone sitting in front of them now, and that's what I was saying earlier. I really appreciate that opportunity to represent the incarcerated people who don't get to speak for themselves, but are undergoing all of the conditions that we're talking about. So thank you. And I am off for some appointments and to hand out some hopefully thoughtful, provoking comments and questions, and just, my God, to ask them to ask just some deeper questions of the Department of Corrections. So thank you very much. And I hope you guys get some good information from the rest of the podcast.
Talk to you soon. Good luck. Kyle Hedquist, what do you have? What's on your mind?
Sure. I think Kyle alluded to this idea that it's it's very interesting when you're sitting in the audience and the Department of Corrections is giving an overview on a particular topic. Between me and Kyle, and the time that both of us spent incarcerated, we can cover quite a few issues. And I know that on more than half a dozen occasions, legislators have come up to us and to talk with us after a informational hearing from the Department of Corrections, from parole and probation, community corrections, just to kind of see if that has been our experience. And that is really what I feel the legislators have embraced is our experience. Neither Kyle nor our attorneys. We've never done policy work before, but we show up consistently. We ask good questions. We try to find good and truthful answers for them. And we do push and we do testify to not only our experiences, but the things we've seen, the things we've heard about. And it does make a difference being down there daily, attending these various hearings. I will say that there was a lot of, well, I think it was just in both of our minds, a little bit of this apprehension, knowing our backgrounds and what are people going to say, what are people going to think. But when you're working in both the House and the Senate judiciaries, the Department of Corrections and the reforms that come along with that's where they are discussed. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have somebody in the room. Just to at least hear and to take notes and to say, I don't know if that's 100% accurate because it's not my experience. And so I feel that has been the biggest or one of the biggest advantages for our entire organization is that one, we have very quick access to legislators in person or their staff. Two, we can meet at irregular times because both me and Kyle live in close proximity to the Capitol. And three, we're getting all this great information, not only from the Oregon Justice Resource Center, but from some of our national partners. And so we have a really good library of solid, factual information as it relates to crime and justice and public safety. And so that's what me and Kyle bring. And like I said, between the two of us, we can cover a whole bunch of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really interesting to see the sort of the influence or the impact that you've had. And I mean, initially when you were both down there was a bit of a novelty to it in the sense of, I think, there was like an Oregonian article about it and just something different. But now it's become, you and Kyle Black have both become sort of just regular fixtures at the legislature. And I think that's a really nice thing. And I think, I was commenting to like Zach and Julia, I think to Julia about this, is that you and both of you are really good at the relational aspects of, building relationships and wanting to just be honest and provide good information. And I think because your engagement isn't transactional, which is how a lot of people are in Salem, you're meeting people for a certain outcome of, something, some tangible, some deliverable good, some money or whatever it may be. But you're there actually trying to provide good information so people can make good decisions about how people are being treated. And you do that because of your own experiences. So I don't know, it just feels like, at least my interactions with legislators and the comments I've heard, it just seems like you've developed good relationships and friendships and, being available as a resource. So it's kind of been fun to watch.
Yeah, and so between the both of us, we attend sometimes both judiciary meetings. We attend healthcare. We attend behavioral health committee meetings. The Oregon legislature has dozens and dozens of different committees. And so I think one of the advantages for us actually living here in Salem doing this job is that we attend hearings that we don't have a bill in. And what you see at the Capitol a lot is people will attend the hearing that their bill is in, and then you don't see them anymore. Where me and Kyle are down there almost daily. And so we will go listen to hearings on committees that we don't have any bills in, just to kind of get some different perspectives, to see if there's an intersection, or maybe just just to see what other people are saying about that topic. And one example is some of the conversations we've had around healthcare, conversations we've had around the unhoused, and conversations around, like adoption and the process, and to see where those intersections are when it comes to crime and how to really keep our communities safe.
One of the things that I've seen from the outside that I find just really wonderful is how the legislators go to you, Kyle Hedquist, and to Kyle Black for credible information, for accurate information about the issues that you're talking to them about. And one of the things that really struck me about the GIPA bill public hearing that we had is that I think that the testimony that you provided and Kyle Black provided was in and of itself very powerful. But just from the interactions with the legislators and the follow-up conversations that happened, it also felt like the legislators trusted and believed the testimony that you were providing about what the conditions are like in Oregon's prisons, and also the need for the legislators to step in and sort of play their role in making sure that adults in custody are treated humanely. And it was just it was really great to watch those interactions and to see just how seriously the legislators were taking the testimony that you provided. And I would add, even in that public hearing in Senate Judiciary, Chair Przanski and the other legislators shifted what they were going to do with that bill, I think because of because of the testimony that you provided in that public hearing.
Yeah, well, it's tangible because me and Kyle have been down there constantly for, let's just say, 3 years. The legislators know us by name. They call us the Kyles. Security knows us. They say hi to us when we come in. Capitol staff say hi to us. Like Bob had mentioned, we have kind of become some fixtures down there, which does make our testimony credible. And I could see it happening in person during that hearing where there was a shift from Senator Przanski that said, okay, I've heard enough. I'm ready to move forward. And to your point, Julia, I think that this topic is important enough because we're talking about human lives here. And I was glad to see that shift, and I was glad to see some humanity win out. And I am hopeful that in the future, we just continue to build that credibility. That's the whole purpose. That's what some of my goals are, is to be credible and reliable. And to Bobbin's point, there was a hearing, I believe last session, the Department of Corrections had given an informational hearing. And immediately following the hearing, Chair Krupp walked over to me around the dais, walked up to me right in front of the DOC folks and said, hey, Kyle, he goes, I want to get your opinion on what they said. And even though it put me on the spot a little bit, he didn't have to do that. He went out of his way to come and check in with me about my experiences based on what the Department of Corrections was reporting. And so that in and of itself shows how much that those relationships really matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it has been like one of the nice things about, like I said, about OJRC is this perspective that I don't think was always there. But, previously what I'd seen organizations do is tokenize people's experiences or backgrounds in ways that was, I don't think it felt, a little bit performative and not well, like, in the sense of putting people in not like very good positions. And so I think the difference, what I alluded to at the outset is, you and Kyle, both of you are just so personable and like know how to make relationships, know how to engage. And so it's that substantive aspect. But you also happen to be formerly incarcerated, which drives you to do this, but it also gives you that perspective that you could share with people. But yeah, I mean, this has been an interesting legislative session. I think, at the end of the session, we'll do a debrief about all the bills that we tried to push through and what worked and what didn't work. But we do have these 4 bills that are moving, plus the voting rights bill, which is an informational. So overall, it's been a fairly, I think, important legislative session for OJRC in being able to help support legislators move these bills, and for being a good resource and giving them good information. I mean, that's always our priority, is just how to provide information and education about these issues. So we'll see how it turns out.
Can I add one thing about the bills that we have moving? Sort of building off of the contributions that our staff who have been formerly incarcerated have made. I want to say nearly all of the legislative concepts that we have could only exist because of the knowledge and the input that has been provided by both the Kyles, but also Angela Kim, who is on staff with the Oregon Justice Resource Center, as well as some of our formerly incarcerated staff that were legal assistants in the Department of Corrections. I mean, they were the driving sort of the drivers of the entire concept itself. And I just cannot overstate how important it has been to have the Kyles and our other formerly incarcerated staff contribute and work on these policies for the Oregon Justice Resource Center.
Yeah, I mean, I think all our bills are informed. All our work is basically informed by the totality of our staff, whether it's attorneys, formerly incarcerated, people who don't have those experiences. But what's really great about our organization is how all these perspectives and skill sets kind of come together and coalesce around issues or even cases that we're working on, and how we bring to bear like those experiences, those knowledge and that insight. So we'll talk about that in a separate podcast too, sort of how we do our work and how our teams, when we're either litigating or doing policy pushes, are kind of created. But I think it really is like a unique thing. But to Julia's point, all the issues that we're digging into, both from an impact standpoint, litigation standpoint, policy standpoint, have all been heavily informed, if not driven by our formerly incarcerated staff. Like we wouldn't understand those issues or the nuances of those issues, but for, the diversity of perspectives that exist in our staff. So yeah, that was like a quickish snapshot of the legislative session, overview of the legislature, some of the bills that we have going on. And, if you want to know more information about sort of our policy or the names of the bills and things like that, just sign up to our newsletter. That's typically the best way to stay up to date as far as what we're doing and how we're doing. You can just do that on our website. And if you're interested in learning more about the legislature, you can go to the Oregon Legislative site, which is just OLIS, OLIS. If you just Google that, it'll come up and you can start looking, poking around there. It feels like a clunky site when you first get there, but it is pretty intuitive once you start playing around with it. And the nice thing is the way it's set up, and the reason why I think it feels a little clunky is because it offers multiple paths to the same information. So you can always get to the same information through like 3 or 4 different ways or pathways. So, but a good place to track the legislative stuff. Any final or closing remarks on legislative session? We're only halfway through.
That was going to be my remark. We're halfway through. There'll be a little bit of a lull until Ways and Means picks up, which is generally towards the end of the session, probably around June, beginning of June. And so, yeah, it's not over. And as you mentioned, Bob, and it's been a tough session for criminal justice reform, I would say, overall. And so the fact that we've still have bills that are in play is really great to see. And yeah, hopefully we finish off the session strong.
All right. Well, just want to thank everyone for listening, and we're excited to be back with the podcast. We hope to have some more content up soon. But again, if you're interested in the legislative session or learning more about OJRC, you can just go to our website and sign up to our newsletter. And you can follow us on social media. At this point, I think we're only on Instagram and Blue Sky, but it's a nice way to keep track of what we're doing as well. Otherwise, we will see you at the next podcast. Thanks for listening to Trailblazing Justice.